Hi folks, welcome to the results programme of the inaugural SciFiScavenger audience survey, in which I asked you to tell me your 10 favourite science fiction books of all time. The method that I've used for scoring them was to give your first choice 10 points, your second choice 9 points, and so on down to 1 point for your 10th choice. And then I've totted all of those up. And that score is what drives the ranking in this video. So without further ado, let's get into the top 75 science fiction books of all time, according to the audience of this channel. The Martian then is at number 75 with 24 points by Andy Weir. And this is a book that I've enjoyed a number of times. I've read it a bunch and I've seen the movie I don't know how many times too. It's not high art, but I like it. And at number 74 with 25 points is Consider Phoebus by Ian M. Banks. I've got this rather poncy Folio Society edition of it. I really love the culture books. I did a video on those recently, but you have rated Consider Phoebus at number 74 with, as I say, 25 points. At number 73 with 26 points is Have Spacesuit Will Travel. It's one of Robert Heinlein's juvenile novels. I haven't read it, so I can't tell you anything about it at all. At number 72, also with 26 points, is Ian M. Banks' Look to Winward, which is a book that I enjoyed more than Consider Phoebus 2, and this involves a tale of revenge and some really nice descriptions of life on a giant orbital, think Larry Niven's Ringworld. It's a good one. I enjoyed it. At number 71, also with 26 points, is Greg Egan's Permutation City. And I haven't read this, but of the Greg Egan that I have read, it's kind of rock hard, diamond hard, even science fiction and a little bit intimidating. But I have been recommended this one and I really should get to it pretty soon. And number 71, also with 26 points, is John Brunner's Stand on Zanzibar, which is a cautionary tale about out of control population growth, and tells the story through an ensemble cast of characters scattered around the world as they deal with the consequences of there being too many people and not enough food to go around, or jobs for that matter. I haven't actually read it, but I have read quite a bit about it. It's pretty chunky for its day. It was a pretty fat book. I think only June competed with it in the 1960s for girth. At number 69 with 27 points is Way Station by Clifford Simak, and a classic that I haven't yet read, but it involves a recluse in the countryside being recruited by passing aliens to run their transit point on Earth, and so he sees a lot of comings and goings. And number 68 with 28 points is Ursula K. Le Guin's The Lathe of Heaven, which I'm ashamed to say I haven't read. I've read a few Ursula K. Le Guin's over the last year, 18 months, but not this, so I really must get to it. No idea what it's about. You tell me. At number 67 with 31 points is Jeff Vandermeer's Born, and I'll just have to put that on the screen because I don't possess a copy of it, and I neither have I read it, so your guess is as good as mine. And at number 66 with 31 points is Chm City by Alistair Reynolds, which is a book that I have read, but not for a long time, probably when it first came out. And it's one of the few Alistair Reynolds books that I don't have yet in hardback, although I will chase a copy down eventually. At number 65, also with 31 points, is Earth Abides by George R. Stewart, and this is a lovely book, very poignant, and it tracks the gradual slide into primitivism or uncivilization after a plague wipes out nearly all the population of the earth, and it follows a guy whose name I forget, who wanders the US looking for other survivors, and there aren't many of them because this plague killed like 99.9% of people, but he does find a few people. They form a small community, and there are a number of generations that are born, and as those generations develop, they slide into a simpler life and eschew the technology, which doesn't work anymore anyway. It's about the original character, the main character, getting old and letting it all go. Very poignant, as I say, really wonderful book. And it's written in 1949, so it's a pretty old one, and it's really good. And number 64, also with 31 points, is Lord of Light by Roger Zelazny, and this is a book that I really didn't enjoy very much. I was just confused by the whole pantheon of Hindu gods thing. I couldn't work out what was going on most of the time. I suspect strongly that I just missed the point of it. I didn't like it at all. Almost DNF'd it, but I did push on through to the end in the end. So not one of my faves, unfortunately. At number 63 with 32 points is Snow Crash by Neil Stevenson, and I have read this. I read this a couple of months back and enjoyed it. Although subsequently having read Neuromancer, I can see why Neuromancer is considered to be the GOAT of cyberpunk. It certainly was better than Snow Crash. I did enjoy it, but not as much as I enjoyed Neuromancer. And we'll see if Neuromancer appears on this list higher up. At 63 with 32 points is Purveyne by Keith Roberts, a book that I'd really love to read. I must get it on my TBR at some point soon. This is an alternative history, and the sliding doors moment, if you like, was back in Elizabethan England. Yeah, when Elizabeth I was assassinated and the Catholics took over England again. and progress was retarded. And I think this is set in the 20th century, but we haven't really progressed beyond steam traction engines. And I think it's a collection of short stories or vignettes set in this world rather than a novel with a through plot. But I haven't read it, so you tell me. Another one that I haven't read yet, at number 61 with 34 points, is Dawn by Octavia Butler. I've read a couple of her books over the last year or so and have enjoyed both of them very much. So I don't yet have, I think there are 2 other books in the Xenogenesis series, and I don't have those yet, so I'm going to reserve reading it until I find those 2 as well, but I gather it's really good. At number 60, also with 34 points, is a British hard science fiction classic, Revelation Space by Alistair Reynolds, which I've reread recently and really enjoyed. And this tells the story of some ancient alien relics which might point to a threat to humanity in the universe that becomes known as the Inhibitors, who seem to have form for wiping out civilization and technology, particularly as they find it. It's really good, and I do love it. In contrast, at number 59, also with 34 points, is a book that I didn't like at all, Arthur C. City and the Stars. I read it earlier this year. And whilst it's got a couple of nice ideas in it, it's just really boring. Nothing happens, particularly the characters aren't particularly likeable, and nothing much happens. Whilst I did finish it, I was tempted to DNF it at one point. Just boring. Maybe if I read it again at some point and I'm in a different mood, I'll enjoy it, but I really didn't like it. Not my cup of tea at all. Which is weird, because I really liked Arthur C. Clarke when I was in my teens and early 20s. I read a bunch. I hadn't read that one before, I must say, and I'm a little bit trepidatious about going back and reading some of the Arthur C. Clarke books that I really loved when I was younger, in case, with my today eyes on, I really don't like them at all. But anyway, City and the Stars did not work for me. At number 58 with 35 points is a book that I do have somewhere in the house and I have read, but I can't put my hand on it. And it's The Story of Your Life and Other Stories by Ted Chiang, which contains the novella which ultimately became the movie Arrival. There are some really great short stories in that book, and I must reread it again at some point. And certainly I loved the one that became Arrival. I think that must be called Stories of Your Life. And the movie is really great as well. At number 57 with 36 points is The Chrysalids by John Wyndham, and this is a book that I really love. It's my second favourite John Wyndham, and my first favourite is a little bit higher up the list. This cover art amuses me because there is nothing like this in the book, certainly not as if you paid any attention to any of the descriptions. That cover art bears no relation to anything that happens in the book, weirdly. Not the first time that's happened on a science fiction book, to be honest. At number 56, also with 36 points, is The Man in the High Castle by Philip K. Dick, which again is another book I'm ashamed to say I haven't read. I would really like to, but it keeps failing to be chosen by the dice of destiny in my tortuous choosing process for my next month's TBR. And maybe I should just pick it as one of my readers' picks one of these days, so I actually get to read it. I enjoyed the TV series. I don't know how much that relation that bears to the novel itself. I'll have to wait and see. At number 55 with 37 points is Dying Inside by Robert Silverberg, and I confidently went to my shelves to find it, and I don't have a copy of it. I thought I must have. I've got a bunch of Silverberg's books, but I do not have a copy of Dying Inside, unfortunately, and I haven't read it either, so I can't tell you anything about that. At number 54 with 37 points is Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler, and it's a book I've only just read, and I really enjoyed it. This just tells the tale of things falling apart, the breakdown of society, and it's set, slightly alarmingly, in our present. So it starts in late 2024 and follows the protagonist, Lauren, through, I think it's 3 years, so it finishes in kind of late 2027. And it tells a tale of her growing up in a walled neighborhood somewhere in a suburb north of Los Angeles, in a small town. And outside the walls of their walled neighborhood, things are going pear-shaped pretty fast. And the inevitable happens that their community is dispersed after a raid by the hungry and the desperate. And Lauren and a few of her friends and other people that glom onto their group head north into the wilds where there are scavengers and cannibals and God knows what else to find sanctuary. It's really, really good. And her descriptions of things falling apart are excellent, if slightly alarming. At number 53 with 38 points is More Than Human by Theodore Sturgeon, which I have not yet read, so I don't know anything about it, and you probably know better than me if you've read it. At number 52 with 40 points is AnFM by Neil Stevenson, in a pretty meaty hardback, and this is a book that I really love. It was last time I did a top 10, it was one of my top 10 books. It might not make it if I did it again, but I particularly love the descriptions of life in this, like a monastery, but it's focused on the preservation of science and mathematics. It's a little bit like, there's echoes of Canticle for Libertwitz in it, I think. The world that Stevenson imagines is very richly described and really wonderful. And it does go about 2/3 of the way through. It turns into a completely different book and a completely different story, which I still loved. But the bits that I really like are the bits set in the Mathic. It's not a monastery or a church, so it's like it has the trappings of a monkish monastery with church services and so on. But those services are chants of maths or pi to the 59th digit or whatever it is, rather than religious stuff. It's really, really good. Well worth a read if you haven't read it. At number 51 with 41 points is Robert Heinlein's Starship Troopers, and I have read this, and it's a pretty early Heinlein book. It's got some of his, what later became his trademark, kind of irascible politics, slightly right-wing, libertarian politics, but it's not too on the nose in this book. There's a little bit of it, and it raises some interesting questions about whether to participate in society, to vote or to hold office, you need to have done military service to have invested some of yourself in that society. And he argues that case, or rather his characters argue that case. Plus there is some bangy, crashy military science fiction in there as well. And it's definitely well worth a read if you haven't read it. And at number 50 with 42 points is I Am Legend by Richard Matheson, which I have read, although it's such a long time ago that I can't really remember a great deal about the book. I remember more about the movie, the Will Smith movie, than I do about the book. But it features zombie vampires in the aftermath of a plague of some kind, and one man is left behind to try to figure out if he can save humanity or not. At number 49, also with 42 points, is Speaker for the Dead by Orson Scott Card, which I have read a couple of times. I think I actually prefer this to Ender's Game. I mean, they are very different books, and they don't really share a great deal apart from one character and some throwbacks to Ender's Game, particularly to the genocide of the Formics. At number 48, also with 42 points, is The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, which I have not read. I think. If I did, it was such a long time ago that I really don't remember anything about it. At number 47 with 43 points is Use of Weapons by Ian M. Banks. It's one of my favourite Ian M. Banks novels, and it tells the story of a guy who's recruited by special circumstances to become one of their active service agents, and it tells two stories really, one of his past and ultimately of his childhood, and then another story of them trying to get him out of retirement to do one last mission. And there's a couple of really big surprises in this book, a twist that I didn't see coming, maybe you did if you read it, and that was a real gut punch. One of the better culture novels, I think. At number 46 with 44 points is Annihilation, the first book in the Southern Reach trilogy by Jeff Vandermeer. I have read this, and my chief memory of it is of the slightly off-centre kind of feeling of it being weird and strange, the influence in the zone and the behaviour of the team that go out there and the stilted conversations that they have and the betrayals, the strange life forms that exist there, and just the sense of it being, of the universe being off its axis, was really, really well done. I haven't read the other two actually. I think there's even a fourth one out now, and I really should read those as well. At number 45, also with 44 points, is Aldous Huxley's classic Brave New World, which I don't think I've read. Again, or if I have, it was a long, long time ago and I don't remember much about it, but I think this is a tale of utopia, kind of. J.B. Priestley says it's not a novel for people with tender minds and weak stomachs, which isn't terribly encouraging. At number 44 with 45 points is Brian Aldiss' Hot House, which is, I think, 5 short stories which are kind of fixed up into a novel. And if I remember rightly, 3 of those 5 are really, really great, and some really beautiful descriptions of a world that's very different to our own now. It's set in our far future, kind of a dying Earth tale. Humanity has been reduced to kind of knee-high green, pretty primitive creatures that live in the trees, and nearly all other animal life has been replaced by plants. Plants have evolved to fit every evolutionary niche and are pretty deadly in the main. And the humans, little green knee-high humans, are hanging on for dear life in every sense. But it's really, really good. The other 2, not so much. I didn't like those as much, but it was 3/5 of it was excellent. At number 43, also with 45 points, is Cormac McCarthy's The Road, a classic post-apocalypse tale of a man and his, I think, son, certainly a boy, who are travelling across what we assume is the United States, heading for the coast, trying to find some safety. And the landscape is ravaged. There's no food. They have to hunt for stored food. There are roving bands of scavengers and cannibals that they have to try to avoid. And it is just bleak as fuck. There is a slim sliver of hope at the end. But otherwise it's really bleak. And actually a book, if you do like this book, then another one that you should seek out is False Dawn by Chelsea Quinn Yarbrough, which has a similar vibe, and it wouldn't massively surprise me if that was an influence on Cormac McCarthy in his writing of this one. At number 42 with 47 points is The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury, which was initially published in the UK as The Silver Locusts, but it's the same content, I think. And this is a collection of short stories which tell the tale of human colonization of Mars, and I haven't read it, so more than that I don't know. At number 41 with 48 points is The Caves of Steel by Isaac Asimov, the first of the 4 Lige Bailey robot books, and this is an old favourite of mine. I read it again recently, actually. It really still holds up for a book that's nearly 70 years old. It's really good. It tells the story of plainclothesman or detective Elijah Bailey and his robot sidekick, who he initially doesn't get on with at all because he's got a human's kind of fear of robots. But together they solve a crime, and then they go on to have more adventures in the following 3 books. It's really good. At number 40 with 49 points is Ringworld by Larry Niven, which I have read, but not for a long time. And I think the thing that I recall is my mind being blown by the sheer scale of it. I think it's really hard to grasp. I can't remember the exact numbers now, but I think if I remember rightly, there's room for millions of Earths worth of land area on this ring world. You can see it around the sun. It's a ring around the sun, literally, and the inside of it is habitable. But much more than that, I actually don't remember about that. I remember there being a really long trek and a band of travellers, including some aliens. But more than that, I don't recall, honestly. At number 39 with 53 points is Anakins Ice, which tells the tale of a sudden encroachment of glaciers around the world and the end of civilization as we know it. I haven't read it, and I'm a little bit intimidated by it because I think her style is quite difficult. But it's a pretty slender book, so it shouldn't be too much of a chore to read when I eventually get to it. At number 38 with 54 points is Highrise by J.G. Ballard, one of his 3 so-called concrete trilogy, Crash and Concrete Island being the other. J.G. Ballard and I are on a sort of truce. I read Crash many years ago and generally hated it, but I have read The Crystal World recently and did quite enjoy that. I wouldn't say I loved it or anything, but it was pretty good. He's had something of a reprieve for me, so I will read some more Ballard. I think I'll read some short stories next, though. I've seen the movie of this, but I haven't read the book. At number 37 with 59 points is The Moon is a Harsh Mistress by Robert Heinlein. I was surprised to find that I don't have a copy of it. I'd really like to read it as well. So I don't have anything to tell you about that one or even show you. At number 36 with 60 points is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which might be the oldest book on this list, and I'm ashamed to say I haven't read it. The 35 with 60 points is The Day of the Triffids by John Wyndham, which I have read many times. It's my favourite of John Wyndham's post-war novels, and this tells the tale of a collapse in society after a sort of double catastrophe. Firstly, there's a cosmic light show of uncertain origin, possibly from man-made satellites, weapons in orbit, whatever, that blinds people. Anyone that was watching it overnight gets blinded, and it follows a protagonist who happens to be in hospital with bandaged eyes at the time. So he wakes up sighted in a land of the blind, and there are a few other sighted people as well, and it's a story of who gets to survive, who gets to decide, and a struggle to survive in this world, which is made more complicated by the Triffids, who are mobile plants and can kill a man with a pretty nasty whip stinger that comes out the top of the plant. And they can move, and they exhibit some signs of a herd intelligence. It's a really good book. I love it. At number 34, also with 60 points, is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, from the sublime to the ridiculous, perhaps. I haven't read this for an awfully long time. I really love the TV series back in the day. I've listened to the radio show a number of times, and I've read this book a number of times, but not for decades. And I should probably read it again, see if I still like it. At number 33 with 61 points is The Scanner Darkly by Philip K. Dick, which I haven't read. I haven't read much Philip K. Dick, and of the ones that I have read, I didn't really enjoy them that much. A couple of them were okay. Of the ones that I'd like to read next is Man in the High Castle, as I said before, and Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which hasn't appeared on this list yet. I wonder if it will. At number 32 with 66 points is The Player of Games by Ian M. Banks. It's the only culture novel I don't have in a hardback of some kind, and this tells the tale of a bored culture citizen who gets recruited by special circumstances to fly across to a different galaxy to play the game of Azad, which is a game that takes a year to play and results in and culminates in the final round is against the current emperor who became emperor when he last won it. And it has a rather fiery, explosive end. And but the thing that I liked about this was the descriptions of the Azad society, which you don't see, which the Azad don't like to parade too much, and it's no surprise it's pretty grim stuff. But I think Banks does a really good job of describing it for us. So not one of my favourite culture novels, but pretty good. And number 31 with 67 points is House of Suns by Alistair Reynolds, another classic of British hard science fiction. I reread this in the last few months and really enjoyed it. Particularly, there's a a chase scene over many light years, which takes, I think, is years, if not thousands of years to complete, just because the distances involved and the speeds involved are so huge. Really interesting premise for the story and told really well. I thought I really enjoyed it. At number 30 with 68 points is A Canticle for Libertwitz by Walter M. Miller, which I've read, which tells the story of a slightly incongruously a Jewish man or a man of Jewish origin who ends up in a monastery in a post-apocalyptic setting, responsible for preserving knowledge in the face of the sort of decline of civilization post-nuclear. And there's at least one cycle of that happens again. It's been a long time since I've read it, and I don't remember much more about it other than that. But a classic and something I should reread. At number 29 with 69 points is one of the first science fiction books that I ever read, and one of the first science fiction movies or things on a screen of any kind that I saw. It was 2001 Space Odyssey, when I saw the movie when I was about 6, and most of it went over my head. And I read the book when I was about 12, and again, still probably most of it went about over my head, particularly the bits with the apes at the beginning. I have reread it a number of times since then, but not for a long time. Again, it's another book that I should reread at some point. Next, at number 28, also with 69 points, is Downward to the Earth by Robert Silverberg, which is a book that I don't have, so I can't, and nor have I read it, so I have nothing to say. At number 27 with 70 points is A Fire Upon the Deep by Werner Vinge, a book that I very much enjoyed when I read it last year for the first time. And I really like the ideas in this, the zones of thought in the galaxy where things happen, things are possible that might not be possible in other zones because of the distance from the core of the galaxy. So us humans on Earth are in the slow zone, but in the beyond, then things can happen. You can have faster than light travel. You can have advanced AI that you need to do faster than light travel. But this is ultimately a story of alien contact, of rescuing of 2 youngish children, and the aliens are really fantastically well drawn in this book. I loved it. And number 26 with 71 points, an oldie but a goldie, is The Forever War by Joe Haldeman. I've got it in this omnibus edition, which has all 3 of the Forever War books. And this is Haldeman's post-Vietnam War novel, which tells the tale of how soldiers respond to being at war and the indifference of the civilian population, exacerbated in this case by extreme time dilation effects caused by the approaching light speed travel that they're required to do to go fight. So there's some tremendous battle scenes in this, but most of the focus of the book is on the effects on the soldiers and the love affairs that they have, and the extreme time dilation, and the amusing ways in which societies develop back on Earth when they return. Really good. Right, now we're in the top 25. At number 25 with 72 points is The Mote in God's Eye by Larry Niven and Joe Pornell, which I read or reread, I can't remember when it was, earlier this year, or maybe at the end of last year, I don't recall, but fairly recently. And I really enjoyed it. I quite liked the second Human Empire. It has, and I liked the very British seeming officer corps on the starships, and I enjoyed the way that the aliens operate in this tale, and it's a pretty close run thing, and I did really enjoy it. At number 24 with 74 points is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, which some people are a bit sniffy about. I really enjoyed it. It was one of my favourite books last year when I read it, and this tells the tale of a desperate attempt to save the Earth from a galactic fate. Suffice to say that there are others involved in this tale, and not necessarily human, and it works really well. It's a fun story. It's not terribly serious, but I really enjoyed it. It's a bromance, effectively, in space. I really loved it. And I'll be very interested to see how they do with the movie when that happens. At number 23 with 75 points is The Dark Forest by Liu Cixin, which is the second, I think, of the 3-body problem series. And until yesterday, I had a copy of this, but I've just sold it because I'm waiting for the broken binding hardback editions to arrive. So I can't show you that. It's been a while since I read them, but I remember enjoying them. And okay, the characters are a little bit wooden, but I enjoyed the concepts in it. And The Dark Forest, I think, is probably my favourite of the 3. At number 22 with 78 points is another classic, Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, which tells the tale of a slightly fascistic regime where books are forbidden and the firemen aren't there to put fires out, they're to start fires. They're book burners, and people who have books in their houses are apt to get snitched on by their neighbours, and the firemen come and will burn you down. And it's a story of a guy who's never read anything because he didn't have any books, and he meets a youngster who teaches him the joy of reading, and he gets into a spot of bother as a result, as I recall. It's been quite a while since I've read it. And number 21 with 80 points is H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds, and I don't think I've read this. I think I mostly know, it's a bit embarrassing for me to say, but I think I mostly know this story through Jeff Wayne's The World, the musical, which which my father bought as one of the first CDs that we ever had in our house, and I listened to repeatedly. And I've seen the live stage show as well, which is also excellent. But I don't think I've read it. But obviously a classic tale, and everyone knows the story. At number 20 with 82 points is Philip K. Dick's Ubik, another Philip K. Dick that I have not read, but I gather is one of his better books. Number 19 with 87 points is Orson Scott Card's Ender's Game, which I've read a number of times. And this tells the tale of a bunch of kids really being trained in a orbital battle school, ready for battle with the Formics, who are the insectoid alien enemy of the peace. And they run a bunch of battle simulations, or are they? And it tells the tale of Ender's development as a serious military strategist. At number 18 with 87 points is Solaris by Stanislav Lem, of course, and I've got it in this omnibus, this King Penguin omnibus. I read it a few months back, actually, and some of it I really liked, but some of it, particularly the exposition, very extremely dry academic exposition, I just found really boring, and I ended up skipping through it, and I just wish there wasn't as much of it in the book. The parts where Lem really builds the tension and the strangeness and the gradual building of the tension on the space station that orbits the planet Solaris, and the oddness, I really enjoyed. The exposition, not so much. And number 17 with 90 points, talking of books that I didn't enjoy very much, is Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke. I read this last year, I think, for the first time. And this tells the tale of some alien overlords who intervene in our petty squabbles, and peace and prosperity result, but at a cost to humanity's development, which, if you haven't read it, I won't spoil for you. The clue's in the title, though. At number 16 with 92 points is The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin, which I have read. I read it a few months back, and I really enjoyed it. It tells the tale of two planets. One is the moon of the other. There's been some schism in the past, and one of the planets is quite austere, and it's not communist, but I think it's anarcho-socialist or anarcho-syndicalist, and it's run on very communal lines. But people are happy. The society works. It's quite hard work because the planet is not particularly well resourced, and the climate's a little bit harsh. And the other planet, which is more capitalist and a bit more prosperous in comparison in many ways. And we follow a scientist, Shevek, who's trying to develop a new faster than light communication method. He's not appreciated on his own planet and isn't allowed to develop his product. And he jets off to the neighbouring planet to see if he can do it there. And he ends up being a pawn in a political game. But this is set in Le Guin's Hainish universe. At number 15 with 93 points is Tiger Tiger, or The Stars My Destination, by Alfred Bester, of course. And this tells the tale of Gully Foyle, who is abandoned, shipwrecked, and passed by when they could have been rescued, and it turns him into a bitter person. He does escape eventually, and it's a tale of his revenge and his development from a personality point of view. From being Mr. Angry to being a bit more cunning and a bit more manipulative, a bit less direct in his manner with people. But I read this for the first time earlier this year and really enjoyed it. At number 14 with 94 points is Inverted World by Christopher Priest, which I read last year for the first time and loved. And this is a very strange world. We're on a mobile city called Earth, and it must move. It needs to stay in touch with something called the Optimum, and we follow the life story of a guy called Hellwood Man, who's a youth at the beginning of this book and becomes apprenticed to the Guild of Navigators, who are one of the guilds that range forward and aft of the city to make sure that the way is clear. And it moves on giant train tracks, which are laid and then replaced as the city rolls over it. And it's not immediately clear why it's like this, and it's not immediately clear where we are, if we're on a different planet or what. But the rules of physics certainly are different here, and the reasons for that does get explained later on. And there is a surprising revelation for Hellwood Man at the end. But it's a really good book, a little bit mind-bending, but I did really enjoy it. At number 13 with 98 points, another disappointing Clarke for me. I read this, I think, probably last year, Rendezvous with Rama. And I remember really enjoying this when I was a youth. But really, again, not a lot happens. We're investigating a pretty fast-moving artifact, which it turns out is hollow. It's like an alien spaceship of some kind, a colony ship, but it's deserted. But some of the tech still works, as the explorers find out, to their detriment. And it's moving so quickly, they don't get much time to spend on it, and it just disappears at the end. And you're like, well, fuck, what was the point of that? There is a sequel, which I don't think is... In fact, there's several, which I don't think are terribly good, but I haven't read those. Or at least if I have, that was a long time ago. At number 12 with 99 points is Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which, of course, became the movie Blade Runner, which is a favourite of mine. I haven't read it. I can't believe I've got to this age in my life without reading it, but I haven't read it. So I'm intrigued to know to what degree it follows the plot that the movie follows. I expect they're quite different, knowing Philip K. Dick. I expect they're quite different, but I would really like to read it. At number 11, just outside the top 10 with 102 points, is Azimoffs Foundation, which again I reread last year and really enjoyed. This was a book, my book from the 80s that I possessed along with the others in the series. And this tells the tale of a fall of an empire. Harry Seldon is a psycho-historian, and he predicts that at some point in the future, the empire, which seems to be, and he's calculated that the empire will collapse and fall into barbarism. And because he drives the emperor a bit crazy, the emperor gives him some money to go and form a so-called foundation for the preservation of knowledge. But actually, that's really a front operation, and their job is to sort of manipulate events so that humanity can survive into a new phase of existence. It reads like a fix-up of short stories, and I think that's a feature of how it was originally written. It was serialised originally. So we're into the top 10. At number 10 with 103 points is Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes, which I read last year and really loved. It's got a parabolic plot. We follow Charlie, who is a bit of a bit backward, a low IQ individual, let's say, but he wants to improve himself. He's at a class to try and get some advancement, and he falls for the teacher a little bit. And she puts him forward for a scientific study based on some results with mice, and it's basically a way to improve intelligence. And so he's a guinea pig in this trial. He's given the drug. And it works really well until it doesn't. So his intelligence improves dramatically. He overtakes all the scientists running the thing. He becomes erudite. And Keyes does that really well because the book is in the form of journal entries from Charlie. And at the beginning, they're scrawled and barely legible, badly spelt, and rather childish in the words that he uses, and they become extremely erudite scientific papers and observations. And he's questioning his existence, he's questioning his childhood, he's questioning the parenting that he had, and whether the friends that he has are really friends that he thought they were. And then it starts to wear off, and so the tragedy is that he starts to go back to being really backward, but possibly happier. A classic, and I really enjoyed it. At number 9 with 105 points is Roadside Picnic by the Strugatsky brothers. And I read this 3 or 4 years ago, and it was all right. I didn't get it. My wife really enjoyed it. So, what do I know? But it tells the story of the Zone, which is one of a number on Earth, where some aliens kind of passed by, dumped a load of old crap, and then went again. And some of that crap is pretty dangerous, but useful. And it tells the story of a stalker, so-called, who sneaks into the Zone to try to find stuff for money, and it's pretty weird stuff. And number 8 with 113 points is Blindsight, which I've got in this Firefall omnibus, which also includes Echopraxia. And I read it. I really enjoy it, but I think I preferred Echopraxia. I do feel like I need to reread Blindsight to fully do it justice. I think some of it went past me when I first read it. It's quite a atmospheric book. It's got space vampires, and the humans that are sent to investigate the aliens are barely human themselves. There's a vampire for a start, but then the others are all variously augmented or are neurodivergent in extreme ways, and wouldn't necessarily be recognised as human normal anyway. And these guys go off to meet these aliens, and the aliens that they meet don't really have any consciousness. They don't have any intelligence, rather. All that they have is functional intelligence, so they can move their limbs and legs and kind of make decisions. But they're completely implacable. So it is a very strange first contact tale, and very well worth a read if you haven't read it. And number 7 with 125 points is Ursula K. Le Guin's The Left Hand of Darkness, which I've got here in a hardback without dust wrapper. I haven't read it. Woe is me. So I can't say anything about it other than it's clearly a classic. At number 6 with 138 points is Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky, which I have read. And I think this is the strongest of the 3 in this series so far. This was really good. Number 2 was pretty good. And number 3, I didn't enjoy it as much. The structure of it annoyed me a little bit. But this is a classic. It's a generation ship story. It's a first contact story of sorts, although the aliens of the piece, the spiders, are not strictly speaking, aliens. There's an uplift operation that went wrong. But I really did love the development of the spider, the portids, civilization, and the way that they handle the various gender issues in their society, women spiders being what they are. And I really enjoyed and I also loved the way that the spiders use ants as computers. That was really funny. A classic, a modern classic, I think. So we're into the top 5. And number 5 with 143 points is The Shadow of the Torturer, the first book in the Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe, of course. And I think this is a modern classic. It's fantastically well described. It's a little bit mind-bending, and it's a book that I gather rewards multiple rereads. But, frankly, at the moment, who's got time? I have read it and the other 3 that go with it. I'd really like to read the Book of the Long Sun as well, but I've only got one of those, and it's the 4th one. This follows the tale of Severian, who is a torturer, and his journey. And this is set in a far future sort of dying Earth type thing, unrecognisable to today's Earth. There's an unreliable narrator, and you're sort of asked to question everything about what you're hearing, and also about the things that are done and found along the way. Who are they? Where have they come from? What's their agenda? Are they human? And there are a bunch of relics from the past, some ancient tech that get involved in the story as well. I would like to reread it at some point in a parallel universe where I have the time. And number 4 with 155 points is 1984 by George Orwell, which I'm embarrassed to say, although I read it, I don't have a copy of it, which I find hard to believe, but I don't. There isn't one in the house. I've looked many times. And number 3 with 203 points is Neuromancer by William Gibson, the goat of cyberpunk. I read this for the first time just a few months back and loved it. I thought I really liked the writing. I liked the world that he described, and the protagonists were awesome. The scenes in space I thought were fantastic as well. And I really must read the other 2 that form part of the Sprawl trilogy. I really loved it. Number 2, with considerably more points than number 3, somewhat to my surprise, is Frank Herbert's Dune with 329 points. So lots of people had this as one of their top few, but slightly less people chose it as their number 1 than chose the book that we're going to talk about in a minute. Dune is rightly a classic. I think it's a classic. One might argue it's more fantasy than science fiction, but nonetheless, I think the scope and scale of it, and considering its age, it's well over 50 years old now, more like 60, it really stands up very well. I think he did a good job of setting the stage in a far future world, which didn't have any of the sort of technology issues that predictive near future books sometimes have, where things have turned out very differently. It's sufficiently far in the future that really doesn't matter in Dune. And as you probably all know, tells the story of Paul Atreides and his transition from being the scion of a pretty wealthy family to being effectively a messiah for the Fremen, and the battle for control of the spice melange on Arrakis. And it's the first of many that Frank Herbert wrote, and then a whole bunch of shared universe books that are less good, honestly. But Dune, I think, is the best of the bunch, and really deserving of its position as the acknowledged classic of science fiction. So what do you think is number 1? If it's not Dune, what is it? At number 1, the top choice of this audience is Dan Simmons' Hyperion, with just 5 points more than Dune had at 334. And this is a retelling of Canterbury Tales, obviously set in a modern space opera setting. And I have read it, but it's a long time ago, and I really must read it again. I think I preferred the second one, if I remember rightly, and there are of the 4 in the Hyperion Cantos. But it's been such a long time, I really don't remember much about it. I remember the Shrike being a very compelling kind of villain presence in the book, but that's really as much as I remember. So the number 1 choice of the people that responded to this survey is Hyperion by Dan Simmons.